Amendment 9 and Amendment 13, which is also coming up shortly for the convenience of the House to avoid having to repeat my remarks. Everyone who says that they support academic freedom and that they support Australia's independence in this Asian century will very soon have a chance to vote for it. Because this bill, if it gets through in the form proposed by the government, will hamper research, will hamper academic freedom and will hamper our independence. And even worse, we are about to be asked to strip out of this bill a key protection that was inserted into the bill after the Coalition moved an amendment that the Greens supported in the Senate. Now, this bill has a very wide scope. It catches research that is being conducted or in connection with a list known as the Defence Strategic Goods List. Now, it can be equipment or nature of research or people with whom one's coming in contact with that can potentially overlap with this list. This list has an index of 79 pages and is itself a 380-page technical document. So if your research overlaps with something to do with that list, you are caught by the bill. Now, this isn't a case simply of, well, if that's the case, then there are a few hoops you have to jump through. If your research is caught by this bill and you do not comply with the provisions of it, you face criminal penalties as a researcher in this country. You have to ask for a permit to have your research published, and it also affects the basic conduct of research itself, your communications with people in another country. When people come from another country to visit you, it will affect that. If you collaborate with institutes in Asia, you will be caught by this. And you are subject to criminal penalties if you do not comply with the requirements of this bill that themselves are only understandable by reference to a 380-page technical document. Now, this isn't some abstract point. This is going to affect research that people do all the time in this country. As the University of Sydney told the Senate, it will affect quantum physics research. One academic there said that this would be an onerous regulatory regime requiring allocation of significant resources to monitoring and managing the requirements that would otherwise be devoted to research. He said, were this legislation in place at the time I was brought to Australia from the US to build a research effort in this area, I may not have come, given the potential difficulties it could cause. This is not someone who's doing research that is potentially that they're writing a blueprint for some weapon that they're about to send to another country. They're doing research in quantum physics. And the government may say, well, this won't affect basic research, it's only research that's done with an intended purpose. Well, having spent some time talking to researchers over many years, so much of research is done now in connection with an application or a potential application, and inventions like Wi-Fi come when you're researching something completely different, as CSIRO knows all too well. And so it is absolutely correct when the University of Sydney says that this would affect potentially melanoma research. When they say there would, one researcher says there would be a chilling effect on participation by foreigners in our biomedical research and the probability that important research in human biology and medicine might never be done. There would be increased compliance costs with resulting reduced effectiveness of Commonwealth research infrastructure funding, reduced effectiveness of private funding to independent research institutes and slowing of research. In the health research sector, it has been robustly demonstrated that investment saves lives and increases welfare, so a reduction of investment through increased costs or non-approval of research will have a real and potentially quantifiable cost in lives and human welfare. And they say too, they tell us that it will have an effect with respect to infectious diseases. Not only is there that laborious process of identifying whether or not you are caught by this Act by reference to another document,
has expired.
Okay.
The amendment, the question is that amendment number 9 be disagreed to. Is the member seeking additional time on indulgence? Yes. Leave's granted.
Thank you. Well, I'm told to keep it short by the Shadow Minister, who's asking me to not defend the motion, the amendment, that the Coalition themselves moved in the Senate. Now, this is incredibly important for the conduct of academics in Australia and their research. And in fact, one of their main criticisms has been that this has been rushed through, some say to coincide with a future visit from the US Secretary of State. Now, there has been complaint after complaint about how quickly this process has been pushed through this parliament, and the fact that it took the Greens in the Senate to get the 2-year review that some on the government benches are relying on to now support the passage of the bill suggests that this bill had problems in it from the start. And of course, the government, to their credit, has acknowledged that there's problems and has worked to find some solutions, but those solutions have not been found because we now still have, at the last minute, just today, Universities Australia saying to this place, the Senate's decision, i.e. the passage of the Coalition and Greens amendment, to match the US exclusion from fundamental research is an important step in ensuring a level playing field for export controls. Universities Australia calls upon the House of Representatives to give this serious consideration, as the Senate has done. The Society of University Lawyers tell us that there is a real likelihood that the bill, as currently drafted, may do more harm than the risks it seeks to address. And they seek the support of this place for changes. And the National Tertiary Education Union says they are alarmed at the inclusion of an amendment that, if passed into law, would create a criminal offence for the publication of certain material related to dual-use technologies. So here we have being rushed through a bill that at the last minute the universities and the academics are pleading with us to include some basic protection. Include some basic protection for research that is not intended to be caught by this, because I think everyone in this House would agree that national security is important and that there should be restrictions on, as has been suggested in the Senate, providing a blueprint for some kind of weapon to someone who is an enemy of this country. And I pause to note in that respect that if we're really concerned about that, perhaps we should be looking at what we're doing with our potentially deadly uranium and where, after second and third countries, that might find its way into whose hands. But if this was simply a bill about dealing with that, then that would be one thing, but it's not about dealing with that. The government and the opposition know it, which is why there's been a scramble to find a solution. And what we know, because the experts and the people who are going to be affected by this are telling us very clearly, is that if this passes, we have not fixed the problem. And, in fact, we are now introducing a potentially chilling regime into research in Australia. And we are doing it quickly when there is absolutely no need to do it quickly, and there is every need to give our researchers more time so that we can come up with a solution. Now, I hear the government's point that the amendment that provides the exemption is broadly drafted. Now, the Greens moved a different kind of amendment in the Senate that was unsuccessful, but that provided a defence for academics rather than an exemption, a defence from people that they were able to rely on to avoid prosecution. That was unsuccessful, but in the absence of that defence being in there, we need this amendment to remain. We need this protection to apply, because otherwise we are about to, for the first time, introduce criminal sanctions on our researchers at a time where they are telling us, you do this and it will affect the biomedical research we do, it will affect the research into physics that we do, it will affect the research into infectious diseases that we do. And it is up to us in this place to listen to them and to heed Universities Australia last-minute plea that we do what the Senate did, and that is maintain Australia's independence, maintain the freedom of our researchers to conduct their own research without fear that they may end up in jail.